Peacemakers. Hello, I'm Kendall Brian Hunter, author of this book. Consider my servant Job, and this is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point, where I always show up. I always come prepared. We never take roll. I'm better than a chatbot, and it's bring your own refreshments. Today it's True Moo. As you can see, it is moo and improved. Much better than the most of the junk food you get at church activities. So, I had a busy week. I was in Los Angeles. Plus, I had some computer problems that took me about a couple of days to resolve. But my computer's up and running now. And here we go. So, today's lesson, we're going to talk about this in the context of President Russell M. Nelson's conference, talk about praying for charity and being peacemakers. So, you have Christ's teachings. It's in it's kind of a simple one in Matthew 18 and Luke 10, but I have notes below so you can double check everything I'm saying. And the first thing you have is you have the apostles get caught up with status seeking. Fortunately, things haven't changed and have changed, and we're much better now. And come on, things still go on nowadays about which general authority you like, the pecking order. And it's very important. Christ's response was, and remember, this is in the context of the 12 getting the endowment and getting the keys and the sealing power. And Christ says, look, you need to be as a child. And then he kind of talks on a bit. He talks about offenses. Christ says, woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come. But woe that man by whom the offense cometh. So he starts out by saying, whoa, that's a lament. He's agonizing over the problem. And lamenting is an appropriate way to agonize over things. And then he says that there must needs be offenses. And this touches upon the problem of evil, natural evil, moral evil. And I discussed this in my book, Consider My Servant Job. Take a look at it if you want it more in depth than I can get to. This is get to the point where I'm really quick. I'd also recommend this book by Stephen J. Stirling called Shedding Light on the Dark Side. Both of us come from use the publisher Cedar Fort. They have a Cedar Fort Unlimited app if you want to take a look at that. Thank you. And that's enough of the commercials. So he talks about evil being something that's necessary, and I'm not sure if he's talking in the refined philosophical sense that we do nowadays, but he says evil is necessary, but also says, woe to them by who they come. People are still accountable for the evil actions they do, even though it's a necessary part of mortality. So that's something to think about and to chew over, and I'm not going to give sort of a cheap, prefabricated, shrink-wrapped answer for this. Something that you're going to have to mull over, and you're going to spend your life thinking, setting aside, coming back to it, thinking about it, and coming back to it and doing the iterative process of revelation until you understand it. Then he talks about if the right eye offend thee, pluck it out. And as the Joseph Smith translation makes clear, and also in the other chapters, that this is referring to our friends, but also family members. So this is one of Christ's hard saying. First of all, what he says about cutting off family members who offend you, think about, understand it in the context of everything else Christ has said, that we don't focus on one verse. That's reductionistic error, but everything that Christ has said and their understanding of the sealing power and also their understanding in the Fmily Proclamation. So my understanding is why you'd say something drastic is that if these family members that they have to cut off pose a danger to you. For example, what if a family member is doing drugs? Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about, how quickly your entire house can turn into a crack house. What if a family member is using a Ouija board, inviting foul spirits into your home? What if your family member lost their faith, but they're being argumentative and toxic? How this severing occurs will, of course, be different for different people, and it happen in different degrees. And something to think about this, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that making sure that you're not in danger, making sure that you're not an enabler, and that mercy is not robbing justice. This is heavy stuff, but this is actually real problems that people have to face, is with having to cut off family members who are being toxic and being disruptive. It's not everything he said, and there's a context in which he's speaking. The entire standard works, including the Joseph Smith translation, understand in terms of your patriarchal blessing and the endowment, plus counsel from church leaders. But this also leads to the don't miss the point about cutting off family members to the next section where Christ talks about forgiving people 70 times 7. This isn't robotic arithmetic. People have these mental spreadsheets. They keep a score. They have a scoreboard of how many times I forgave you, but you haven't forgiven me. People who withhold forgiveness as a means of self-justification and control, bringing up past offenses that have been settled, and you bring these up just to hurt the other person. Well, 15 years ago, you did this to me. My response would be, I thought we settled that. So maybe I'd like to, we can discuss that maybe at another time. Just, this is a diversionary tactic. And then Christ follows it up with the parable of the unforgiving servant. This is a guy who ripped off his king millions, and he wouldn't forgive another person, just a few dollars that he's missing. It's a little bit like right now is the blue check mark on Twitter. You're seeing these multimillionaire celebrities who own 6 homes, and they're complaining because they have to pay $8 for a blue check mark. It's the exact same mindset that, look, man, you got money to cover this, and it's the same thing as that, you need to be more forgiving. You turn the other cheek. You forgive 70 times 7, but there's also limits to that. I'll talk about that a little bit later. I remember typing it in my notes at least. So let's move on to the next point. The keys is that the 12 are given the sealing power, and my understanding would be implicitly they'd be giving the priesthood keys, as was the Peter, James, and John. And then later on, they called 70 disciples. And I understand that would be an apostolic office, and that understanding comes from the priesthood sections of the Doctrine and Covenants, and also when the 70 were sustained as in the Kirtland Temple dedication, they're sustained as 70 apostles. So you have the 12 apostles and you have the 70 apostles. Of course, there's a difference in the office, and we just call them 70, I think, as a shorthand. They go out, they come back, and they report to Christ. And the important lesson on this is that we have an organized religion. You need to delegate, and you're also accountable for it. So if you've been delegated to, how are you handling your delegated stewardship? Do you constantly need to be prodded, or are you being diligent with the stewardship? Later on, you have the curses that Christ puts upon the cities, and that rubs people the wrong way. But double check this against 3 Nephi chapter 9, where Christ talks about the cities that he destroyed. Yeah, Christ destroyed these cities. Unconditional love. That's not a doctrine of the gospel, because the Spirit will not always strive with men. Genesis 6:3, 2 Nephi 26:11, and in other places. You do forgive 70 times 7, but mercy cannot rob justice. And so we don't have a quantification. There's no metric for this. And it just comes back to revelation on when you do one, when you do the other. Do you forgive, or do you say, okay, let's everyone out of the pool, we're shutting the door on this, and we're having to sever a branch off. And we can't give you a specific, easy answer for that. You have to go by revelation. You have to understand the principles of the gospel and go by revelation on that. This also gets followed up by prayer, is that we think about the Lord's intercessory prayer, what we call the Lord's Prayer. We think about the prayers in 3 Nephi, but there's the praying about, there's just great things going on. And in fact, going on in our dispensation, that's something Howard W. Hunter talked about, and also Joseph Smith. And it's in Joseph Smith was in chapter 44 of the Joseph Smith Manual, that many people wanted to see the things that apostles were seeing, but were denied it. Abraham saw Christ's day and rejoiced, but also in our dispensation, the same thing applies. We're seeing the culmination of the planet's history. All the previous dispensations are running into our dispensation. And we sit here and we argue about how many women speak in General Conference when we're supposed to be hearing the voice of Christ in General Conference. We're arguing over budgets who gets what amount of money. And we're just really missing the point on a lot of stuff. And I think that's one of the reasons why we sometimes don't get the revelation we should get, because we're just having these petty fights that you read about in the New Testament. And we're worried about it, and we're just not stopping on this arguing about petty stuff. Who's in control? Who controls the budget? We're doing the work of Christ, and that's the main thing we should be focusing on. So Joseph Smith in chapter 44 of the manual, of the Joseph Smith manual, and Howard W. Hunter, this was actually the talk that he gave back in 1993 when he had the terrorist interrupted him. I happened to be there, and it's kind of fun. I've reread that talk over time, but where Howard W. Hunter in this talk just had this terrorist interrupt him back in 1993, and then the situation calmed. The guy was arrested, and we just went on and gave the fireside talk, and he talked about the glories of our dispensation. So give it a read. Links below. We are really booking through this. This is 10 minutes, and the parable of the Good Samaritan. We all know it. Anything I say would be kind of redundant, so just give it a good read and make sure you're learning the lesson that you need to be learning at this time. It may mean a different thing for you at a different time, just because you're in different situations. Before mission, it means something different after your mission, before marriage, after marriage, when you're born, when you're getting closer to death. Kind of like I am. Once you hit 50, you start counting backwards, but pay attention to that. I have a little bonus section, and it's on Mary and Martha, so go check out my bonus section. I have a surprise general conference talk about that. So we're at the end at 11 minutes, and let me talk about the Christ quotient. And I just want to read this off of my notes. I've been doing that a lot more. Like I said, I kind of had a hectic week. So here's the Christ quotient. And this goes off of President Nelson's general conference talk, the April 2023 talk. Be a peacemaker. Being a peacemaker does not mean being an enabler. Being a peacemaker means being long-suffering. To be a peacemaker, we must pray for charity. And being charitable, that's the point.